Back in high school, my house had a huge backyard that was connected to a large forest. When we were kids, me and my friends would go and play games far out in the woods. There was always this small sense of danger being out there, which made things more fun. As we grew up, though, we stopped going out there because there was no point. But then one day, me and my buddy Tyler were hanging out on the couch when he brought up this idea of going out into the woods late at night. Over the next few minutes, our idea evolved from just a simple walk in the woods to full-on camping overnight. Tyler said his parents had a tent we could borrow, so we walked down the street and picked it up from his garage. Now's a good time to mention that neither of us had ever been camping before, so we had no idea what we were doing. Honestly, I don't think either of us thought anything of it, because we would only be out there for a single night. After packing a bag with a bunch of snacks, water bottles, and a portable phone charger, we set foot in the woods. We found out within the first couple minutes that the flashlight Tyler brought was really shitty, barely lighting up more than a few feet ahead. It was enough to keep us from walking into trees and bushes, but we couldn't see much else. During the first 15 minutes of walking, we talked about how excited we were and how creepy it was going to be. But then we walked for another 15 minutes without really talking. I think we were both mesmerized and a little bit spooked by the eerie silence. A couple times, I thought I heard something walking nearby, but the flashlight would never reach far enough to see anything. After our 30 minutes of walking, we found a place to set up. It was an open section of grass with trees around it. Tyler wedged the flashlight on top of a bush so that it lit up the area. And then we started setting up the tent. He said it was an easy assembled tent, but there was nothing easy about it. We probably spent an hour to get the tent to stand up without falling in on itself. It also didn't help that every time we'd hear something, we'd have to grab the flashlight out of the bush and shine it around, then set it back up and start over on the tent. I don't know about Tyler, but at this point, I was regretting coming out there. When we did eventually get the tent up, though, it was a lot less stressful. We sat inside and listened to the sounds of the woods. It would be completely silent sometimes. Then a minute later, there would be birds chirping or some other animal making noises. It was a really cool experience until we both heard a more familiar sound. We stayed in the tent, listening as these footsteps made their way around the trees. They didn't sound like they were getting closer, but more like they were passing by. One thing we were both sure of was that they were human footsteps, not any other animal. After a minute they were gone, but me and Tyler stayed quiet, staring at the inside of the tent as we listened carefully. Around 10 minutes later, once we were sure whoever that was long gone, we left the tent and sat outside instead. We both felt a little too vulnerable sitting inside there without being able to see what was going on around us. As we sat and talked for a while, that same sound started coming up in the distance. This time, it was getting closer. It eventually got so close that we were worried they were coming directly at us. Tyler shined the flashlight in the direction of the footsteps, but the sound continued. They walked toward us slowly, and just when we thought the person would come into view of the flashlight, they stopped. They sounded so close, enough for us to hear them breathing, but just barely outside of the light. Both Tyler and I were frozen, staring at the darkness beyond the flashlight. Then we heard them take one step back, and then they began walking away. A minute later, the footsteps had disappeared, and the entire woods was silent again. We undid the tent as fast as possible and immediately left. We were so shaken up, we didn't even follow the right way home and somehow ended up on a neighboring street. We walked down to my house and stayed up the entire night in my room, talking about what happened or what could have happened. We never stepped foot inside those woods again, and even today, I stay far away from anywhere isolated. Whoever that person was, out there alone in the woods at night, had to be up to something awful, and I think we were really close to finding out. I'm 28 and live in Illinois. If you've ever been here, you know this state is completely flat and doesn't have much to do in terms of hiking or camping, at least not with scenic views. This year, I tried to go camping for the first time in a secluded forest. I thought it would be the perfect starter camping trip, since the land was flat and the trail was mostly a straight shot. At the end was supposed to be a small pond, so at least there would be somewhat of a nice view. The hiking part was short, being just under an hour, but the pond at the end was very underwhelming to say the least. It was very small and surrounded by swampy mush, so I had to put my tent further down into the forest where the ground was dry. I'll admit though, after an hour or two, I was really bored. I decided to get up and walk around the pond just to see what was around. I wandered to the other side, and really there wasn't much to see. It was a peaceful and beautiful forest, but there were no defining landmarks of any kind, so it was kind of just the same forest all around. I started making my way back to my camp, and by then the sun was mostly gone. I brought a small fire starter, so I used that to get a campfire going and heat up some food, but not long after sunset, I noticed a light across the pond. It was in the trees just outside of the pond, but it was right where I had walked earlier, and I knew there was nothing there just an hour ago. While it was uncomforting being out in the forest with some stranger or possibly strangers, I knew that this was one of few camping trails around here, so the odds of it weren't too crazy. I went about my night, looking across the pond every so often. As it got darker though, this light that I thought was a campfire became more apparent, and I realized it was a flashlight, or some sort of mechanical light. I wasn't sure what to make of it, but an hour more into the night, I saw from the corner of my eye the light started dimming, and then after a few flickers, it went out. I stared at the dark and empty forest across the pond for a good 10 minutes, waiting for the light to come back up, but it never did. It gave me chills. But again, I had no idea what to make of it. I went about my night, looking across the pond every so often. As it got darker though, this light that I thought was a campfire became more apparent, and I realized it was a flashlight, or some sort of mechanical light. It didn't take long for me to find the culprit, a hefty flashlight laying in the grass. The batteries were drained, but it looked pretty new, no scratches or noticeable wear and tear. I looked around some more and saw nothing else to indicate someone being here. After some thought, I decided to leave the flashlight where I found it and started heading back to my camp, but stopped in my tracks when I saw someone across the pond. They were standing by my fire pit in the middle of my camp. Then I saw another person come out of the trees and join them. It looked like two adult men, but that's all I could tell from where I was. I was too scared to yell or say anything, so I just watched as they walked around my camp and looked through my things. Then one of them stopped and turned to face the pond. He stood there, scanning the tree line where I was standing, until he was looking right at me. He only looked at me for a moment, but it sent shivers through me. I watched the man leave the camp and start walking between the trees. I lost sight of him for a moment, until I caught a glimpse of him sprinting through the forest. I ran further into the forest, away from the pond. I knew the chances of them finding me were near zero, but I was too scared to think straight. I ran for probably 15 minutes before I stopped and turned in the general direction of my car. Luckily, I made it safely, but I lost everything I had. To put it shortly, nothing happened afterwards. I filed a report with the police, but it all turned to nothing. I think about that flashlight a lot though. Was it those men's, or was it someone else's? I hope the flashlight was just a ploy they used to get me away from the camp. But if it was, then why would they come after me? I keep trying to convince myself that it was just a robbery, and they had no other intentions, but in my gut, I know that I likely came close to never making it out of that forest. Last year was the first time I'd ever had something happen on my camping trip. I'd go camping alone several times a year, usually going to the same spots, but sometimes I'd try and find somewhere different. For this trip, I decided on a 4-mile camping trail that I'd never been on before. I drove out 2 hours from my house to a remote location where I started the hike from. Right away, I was not enjoying the trail as much as I thought I would, mainly because some portions of it were wet and muddy. Still, I continued along and tried to avoid those spots. I went down for a while, and around 45 minutes in, I saw something off the side of the trail. It was a tent, but very worn down and had a few rips in it. From afar, I could see that nobody was inside of it, so I walked closer. There were no signs of any intentional damage. It all just seemed to be weathered over a long period of time. The fact that it was still standing up was mind-blowing to me. I looked around it and inside of it, but oddly enough, there was nothing else. I thought I'd find a bunch of stuff left behind, but there wasn't anything at all other than the tent itself. After a couple of minutes, I went back to the trail. I thought about it for a while, but couldn't come up with any good reasons to leave a tent like that. As I walked for the last hour and a half of the trail, I came across dozens of left-behind objects. All of them were camping or hiking equipment, but seeing all of this stuff scattered around a 4-mile trail gave me an uneasy feeling. Who would leave everything behind? It was definitely not an accident, and I was pretty sure it was all from one person. When I got to the end, I set up my tent a good distance away from the trail, just to be safe. It was getting dark already, so I stayed at my campsite until I was ready to sleep. I felt a bit nervous to go to bed, but I was able to sleep through the whole night without issue. When I got up, it was early in the morning, around 4 or 5, so the sun wasn't fully up yet. I unzipped my tent and stepped out, but right away, I could tell something was wrong. I turned around, and on the other side of my tent, a man stood just a few feet away. He was tall and thin, wearing disgusting clothes, and his face was covered in dirt and grime. He looked at me with this empty stare. I stood there motionless. In the moment, I was so shocked and scared. It almost didn't even seem real. "Leave," he spoke in a soft yet creepy tone. I nodded and quickly started gathering my backpack, but he immediately rushed toward me. I fell back, and all I could get myself to say was, "Okay," repeating it over and over. The man stood over me, still with that empty look in his eyes. "Leave," he said again. I understood what he meant this time, and quickly got up and rushed away, leaving everything behind. I took one look back as I got out of there, and the man was rummaging through my backpack like a curious animal. I jogged as far as I could, then fast walked the rest of the way to my car. Thank God I kept my phone and keys in my pocket, or this situation could have been 100 times worse. I drove out until I got service, then called 911. I found out that there was an almost identical case to what I experienced, but whoever filed it chose for it to not be publicly announced by the police. It was likely the person whose tent and belongings I found on the trail. After a week of talking to the police and going over everything, they were able to organize a small search party of officers. They went down the trail and came back with no sightings or evidence of the man, but they found most of my stuff nearby my campsite, tossed around like trash. After that, the case went stale just like the previous person's. The thing I always come back to is how the man didn't keep anything. He just scattered it all around the forest with no intent of using any of it.